Hi, I'm Cameron Jack. I am a lecturer here at the University of Florida in the Department of Entomology and Nematology. And what I wanted to discuss today is about a parasitic mite that is a very big problem in the honeybee world, which this mite, varroa destructor, will actually feed on the fat tissue of the honeybees, and by so doing vectors a lot of the viruses that are present inside honeybee colonies. Varroa is considered to be one of the number one issues facing honeybees, and and certainly an issue for beekeepers as they try to control the mite to maintain strong and healthy colonies. So this mite was first detected in 1987 in the United States, and we are still struggling for adequate controls um, that are cost effective for beekeepers. So what I'm going to show you today is a few different sampling methods that beekeepers can use to estimate the number of mites that are found in these colonies, and really having a good understanding of the varroa populations within your colonies is important for you as a beekeeper to make management decisions. Okay, so now we're going to do our first method of sampling, which will use a powder sugar shake, which is a very common method used by commercial beekeepers and hobbyist beekeepers. It's a non-destructive method, and so a lot of beekeepers like to use it because it's not actually going to kill the bees. It certainly doesn't make them happy, but is not lethal. So what I want to do is to try my best to find a frame that will have some open brood. Usually, if they are emerging, with also mixed with emerging adult bees is best, because that's most likely where the varroa is going to be. So we're just kind of cutting to the chase here by opening and starting with a frame that's towards the middle. Now, probably the most important rule before you take a sample of bees is to make sure that the queen is not on this frame, because there is nothing more frustrating than taking a sample and finding the queen later inside that sample. So you got to double check, triple check to make sure that the queen is not there. I'm just doing a quick scan for that queen. And I'm thinking that this frame might be a good frame to sample from. There's not a whole lot of bees. We're in the middle of the fall here in Florida, and so the queens have definitely slowed down their egg laying, and so the colonies are not quite as strong. But this is a pretty good frame because there are a lot of drone cells that are some of them that have been recently emerged. And so this is most likely where we're probably going to find some varroa. So let's take our jar. I like to use a wide mouth jar, and it's really important for a powder sugar shake that you've replaced the regular lid with a screen mesh that's a number 8 mesh. That means it's 1/8 inch in between each one of these little openings. So what we're going to do is we're going to, the easiest way that I have found to sample is to just put some light pressure on the bees, and you want to go down the backs of the bees, and the bees will tip in and fall into the jar. If you go up, it's going to make the bees really mad, but if you go down, they will tip right in. So I'll show you how to do this. This is something that kind of intimidates new beekeepers, and so I think it's just something that you just need to go out and try yourself, because it's not as hard as it might seem. Okay, so now I'm going to go down the backs. Just put some constant pressure going straight down, and then in between I'm kind of shaking the jar so those bees aren't flying back out. If I need a little bit more, I'm going to keep going. We want to get to about a half of a cup. So I'm going to say we want just a little bit more. So I'm going to flip this over and take a little bit more. Okay, so now I can put this frame down. I'm going to put my lid back on. So now you see I've got about a half of a cup. It's also really nice once after you've done it for a little while to go out and mark the jar with the line. So now we'll take a break and we'll get our powdered sugar so that we can put it inside this jar. Okay, so now we moved away from the hive a little bit so we can stay in the shade. And we're going to put the powder, we've got our sample of our jar with about 300 bees. And now we're going to put about 1 to 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar. So you want it, if it's really humid outside, maybe you want to do this indoors because then it makes the powdered sugar clump a little bit more. So if you can measure out with a measuring spoon, or you can take your hive tool and get a kind of a heaping scoop or two. Whoops, missed some there. And you just kind of place it down and you're actually putting these on the bees. Now the idea behind the powdered sugar is you're trying to find something that is going to dislodge the mites off of the bodies of the bees so we can actually count them. And powdered sugar is really nice because it's something that just drives these bees absolutely crazy, and it's a fine enough powder that it will actually stick to the feet of the mites. And so now that we've put in our powdered sugar, you can see that these bees are kind of going all around trying to get the powdered sugar off. What we can do is we just kind of give it a little shake. We want to roll these bees around, make sure that they're nice and coated with powdered sugar, and just have them be tumbling in there just like in a dryer, right? So they're getting completely coated with that powdered sugar. And now we're going to just tip it over, and you want to have something that's kind of on a white background, something like this. This is just like a big paper towel, and we're just rolling this over, and we're going to kind of slowly and gently roll these bees trying to get out any mites. So the white background helps us spot these mites because these mites are small, but they're also brown. So it looks like out of all of that, we only had one mite come out, and you can see how small this is. It helps if you have a little bit of a powdered sugar, or if you have a little spray bottle of water that you can kind of dampen this paper towel, and it will help you spot the mites a little bit easier. At least when you're first starting out, when you're learning how to do this, it's nice to have it on a wet surface so that you can spot those mites and it'll dissolve the sugar. So with this, we are now estimating that since this was about a half of a cup of bees, we assume that that's about 300 bees in our sample. Now out of 300 bees, we only found one mite. So that is, about 0.33 mites per 100 bees. So it's usually, when we're thinking of infestation levels, we're thinking in terms of mites per 100 bees. So this is actually quite good for us as a beekeeper. This tells us that our infestation rate currently is pretty low. And so in this regard, we'd probably not treat, or we would consider maybe a certain kind of treatment that is kind of a low impact treatment, and just to rotate our chemical treatments so that our mites aren't becoming resistant to any one particular treatment. We're going to sample another colony using a different method. This method that we are going to use now is called the alcohol wash. I like the alcohol wash, especially as a researcher, because it allows me to count the number of bees, because this is a destructive sampling method. So the bees will drown in the alcohol, but this is a good method for us to dislodge the mites off of the bodies of the bees. So I'll show you, we'll take a sample, we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go. I think it's best to just pre-fill with a little bit of alcohol. You can use just isopropyl alcohol, like any rubbing alcohol. This is not a good frame to sample from, so we're gonna we'll find a different one. This is a good frame for us to be sampling from. It's because you can see that there's lots of open brood, and so there's a high probability that we're gonna have some mites on this brood, or on this frame, excuse me. So we're gonna check for the queen. No queen. We're gonna double check, because again, the last thing we wanna do is to sample our queen. So now let's grab our jar, and we're going to sample down the bodies, down the backs of the bees, so they tip into the jar. And if your jar is already filled with alcohol or your soapy water, then the bees will drown as soon as they hit the bottom. We're going to want to get maybe a little bit more than that. Maybe just a hair more. Okay, I think that's a pretty good sample. We'll see about how many, but I'm guessing we've got about 250 to 300 bees in that sample. Close up the hive and we'll go inside to do the counts. Okay, let's go inside and we'll count these mites. So the first thing we got to do is we're going to get rid of the alcohol so that we can start counting. Now, we're here at the University of Florida, and so we're going to be extra safe. We're going to make sure that we're going to pour out our alcohol. Instead of pouring it down the sink, we're going to dispose of it properly. And now, one way that we like to do is to use just a honey sieve that we use for quantifying virroa. You can see that this top part of the sieve is about the same as what we use for powdered sugar shakes, about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit smaller. And so it's small enough for the mites to go through, but not the bees. And then this bottom part of the mesh is really fine, and so that it catches the mites. So it's a good way for us to separate the bees and the mites. So first we're going to dump out our alcohol and pour it through this funnel. And so now that we've dumped it out, we want to kind of take a look, because I can see that there are mites that are still stuck to the bodies of, are still stuck to the jar. So we want to put these bees now back, or we want to kind of rinse this off. And now that we've got most of the alcohol off, we can feel good about pouring water through it, just to make sure we wash everything really well. So we're going to rinse this out. You can come a little closer so you can see. We're going to rinse this out with some water. And now again, we can put this down the sink and it's okay. It's mostly water. Now let's see, make sure we didn't get any more mites that are stuck. There's a couple. Okay, I think we've got this jar cleaned off of all the mites. Oh, there's one on the lid, so it's good to check the lid as well. Okay, and now we can actually use this hose to wash the bodies of the bees. So I just give them a pretty good spray. You can rub them around with your hands a little bit, spread them out. Okay, Now we can turn off this water and we'll see what we've got. So we can now count all of these bees to give us an exact ratio. But first let's look and see what our mites are. So this colony that we just sampled was riddled with mites. It might be a little bit harder to see, but we're going to try our best to count these mites individually. Sometimes it helps if you have, something pointy that you can kind of move the mites so that you can make sure that you can count. This colony was severely infested. You can see that there are a lot of mites, and I'll go ahead and I'll count those now. Okay, so I counted 31 mites. Now this takes a little bit of practice because there are some other, maybe some small pieces of wax, maybe sometimes the stingers of the bees might come through, and so you have to be able to practice a little bit to differentiate between a mite and something else. But here we have 31 mites, so that's an insane amount of mites. So now let's count the number of bees that we have. So again, you can use something like this, or we can just count with our fingers. This is going to take me a minute. I like to separate them into piles of 10. So after we've counted all the bees and counted all the mites, we found 31 mites per 289 bees. So that means that we almost have 10 mites per 100 bees, which is just insane. That colony was very highly infested with varroa. Most likely, it was a very kind of small colony, so most likely it's not going to survive very much longer. But if we can see that usually what we consider to be the threshold for treatment is usually when you reach the point of 3 mites per 100 bees. So this is almost 3 times, or about 3 times past that threshold. So we definitely would need to consider very heavy treatment at this point if we are going to save this colony before it collapses. So with that, we've seen 2 different methods, the alcohol wash and the powdered sugar shake. And so with that, you can see one is destructive, one is non-destructive. They both have their pros and cons, because the alcohol wash is much more accurate because we can count the exact number of bees within our sample. So with that, I hope that you enjoy, and I hope this video is useful for you as you go out and monitor your colonies for varroa.